You can tell a lot about a man by the way he treats people when nobody is watching. Claire Bennett heard the words years ago from her mother, but she never truly understood them until the rainy Thursday night she met the man everyone else would later call a billionaire. At 10:47 p.m., the diner was almost empty. Neon lights flickered softly against the fogged-up windows while rain tapped steady rhythms onto the streets of Lower Manhattan. Claire moved quietly between tables with the practiced grace of someone who had spent too many years carrying heavy plates and pretending her feet didn't hurt. Her white sneakers were damp from the walk to work. Her black apron smelled faintly like coffee and cinnamon syrup. Across the room, two finance guys in expensive suits laughed too loudly over melting bourbon ice, while a tired nurse near the window stared blankly into a bowl of chicken soup. It was the kind of night where loneliness sat beside every customer like an invisible guest. Claire wiped down booth 7 slowly, her mind drifting toward the overdue electric bill folded inside her purse. Her mother's medication had gone up another $80 this month. Rent was due Monday, and the tiny bridal shop in Queens had called earlier to remind her that the discounted wedding dress she'd been eyeing would only stay on hold until tomorrow morning. She sighed softly and tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear just as the bell above the diner door chimed. The man who walked in looked cold enough to break apart. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair damp from the rain. He wore an old brown jacket and faded jeans that had seen better years, but something about him felt strangely out of place inside the tiny diner. Not arrogant, not flashy, just controlled, like a man used to hiding expensive things beneath simple fabric. His boots were wet. His hands were rough from the cold, but the silver watch resting beneath his sleeve looked like it belonged behind glass in a luxury jewelry store on Fifth Avenue. Claire noticed it immediately because people who struggled to pay bills didn't wear watches that quiet and elegant. The stranger slid into booth 7 without looking. At the menu. Coffee, he said softly. His voice was low, calm, the kind that made people stop talking without realizing why. Black. Claire nodded. Long night. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. You could say that. She returned a few moments later with fresh coffee steaming gently between them. Up close, his eyes looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying too much silence for too long. That'll be $3.50, she said. The man reached into his wallet slowly. Claire caught a glimpse of thick black metal tucked between worn leather folds. An American Express Centurion card, the kind most people only saw online. Her eyes lifted back to him instantly, but his expression never changed. Instead, he quietly handed her 4 wrinkled $1 bills. Keep the change. Claire stared at the bills for half a second longer than she should have. Interesting, she thought. Very interesting. Most rich men she'd served wanted the whole room to know they had money. They flashed watches, raised voices, ordered $1,000 wine with fake casualness. But this man sat alone in wet clothes, drinking cheap diner coffee at nearly 11 at night while pretending not to own one of the rarest credit cards in America. Outside, thunder rolled softly over Manhattan. Inside, the stranger wrapped both hands around the coffee cup like he hadn't felt warmth in weeks. Claire should have walked away. Instead, something made her stay. You know, she said quietly, glancing toward the rain-covered windows. People usually come here when they're either celebrating something or trying to forget something. For the first time since walking in, the man looked directly at her. Really looked at her. And when he spoke, his voice barely rose above the sound of the rain. What if it's both? Claire should have walked away after that. Most waitresses learned quickly not to linger around mysterious men with expensive eyes and sad voices. But something about him felt different. Not safer exactly, just quieter. Like he was tired of pretending to be someone the world expected. The stranger stared down into the black coffee for several seconds before speaking again. What about you? He asked softly. Which one are you? Claire blinked. What? Celebrating something or trying to forget something? She laughed once under her breath, though there was no real humor in it. Definitely not celebrating. His eyes lifted toward her again. Calm. Observant. The kind of eyes that noticed details most people missed. Claire suddenly became aware of the small stain near the cuff of her uniform sleeve and the way exhaustion probably sat beneath her eyes like bruises. Long week, he asked. Long year. That almost made him smile. Almost. Somewhere behind the counter, the old espresso machine hissed loudly while rain continued sliding down the diner windows in silver streaks. Midnight in Manhattan always made the city feel lonelier than it looked in movies. Claire leaned lightly against the booth across from him, lowering her voice. You know, people usually tell me their entire life story after 2 cups of coffee. Do I look like someone who talks a lot? No, she admitted. You look like someone who listens a lot. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Small, barely visible, but real, like she had accidentally touched a truth he kept hidden. The stranger glanced toward her left hand resting against the table. You engaged? Claire looked down automatically at the thin silver ring she still wore, sometimes out of habit. Not because she missed Daniel. That part of her life had ended almost 2 years ago, but because removing the ring completely had once felt like admitting failure. Not anymore, she said quietly. Sorry. Do not be. She folded her arms lightly against the chill in the diner. Turns out he liked my savings account more than me. The man went still for half a second. That happens more than people admit. Claire studied him carefully now. The expensive watch, the careful posture, the voice that sounded educated without trying. Even the way he held the coffee cup felt refined. Nothing about him matched the worn jacket or rusted pickup truck parked outside beneath the flickering diner sign. What about you? She asked gently. Someone break your heart. Thunder rolled again across the city. The stranger looked toward the rain-covered streets before answering. No, his voice dropped lower. She broke my trust. Silence settled softly between them. Not awkward, just heavy. Claire understood that kind of silence. The kind people carried after disappointment changed them permanently. She straightened slightly as another customer waved for a refill across the room. I should probably get back to work before my manager thinks I disappeared. The man nodded once. Of course. But as she turned away, his voice stopped her again. Claire. She froze slightly. I never told you my name, she said. A faint shadow of amusement crossed his face. Your name tag did. She looked down and laughed quietly at herself. Right. I am Ethan, he said. Ethan Reed. The name sounded simple. Too simple somehow. Like something chosen carefully. Claire gave him a small smile before returning to the counter. But throughout the next hour, she kept catching herself glancing toward booth 7. Ethan barely touched his coffee after the first cup. Instead, he sat quietly watching rain slide across the windows while the city moved around him in blurred headlights and reflections. Around 12:15 a.m., a black luxury SUV suddenly pulled up outside the diner. Claire noticed it immediately because cars like that did not belong in her neighborhood at midnight. The driver stepped out wearing a dark overcoat despite the rain and hurried toward the entrance. Ethan saw him too, and for the first time all night, tension flashed across his face. Sharp, instant, controlled. The driver entered quickly, scanning the diner before walking straight toward booth 7. Sir, the man said quietly, stopping beside Ethan. We have been looking everywhere for you. Claire looked down instinctively, pretending to wipe silverware while listening. Ethan stood slowly from the booth. His calm expression returned almost immediately, but something had changed. The air around him felt heavier now, more powerful somehow. I told you I wanted tonight alone, Ethan said evenly. Yes, sir. But tomorrow morning's board meeting cannot be delayed again. Board meeting. Claire's hand paused against the fork she was polishing. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out several crisp $100 bills, and placed them carefully beside the untouched coffee cup. For the inconvenience, he said softly toward Claire without fully looking at her. Then he walked toward the door beside the driver, rain and cold air rushing briefly into the diner as the black SUV headlights reflected across the wet floor tiles. Claire stared down at the money after he left. $500. For 1 cup of coffee. Claire stood motionless beside the counter long after the black SUV disappeared into the rain. $500 rested beside the empty coffee cup like some kind of mistake. The old cashier named Martha leaned over slowly, adjusting her glasses. Either you just met the nicest man in Manhattan, she muttered, or the weirdest. Claire forced a faint smile, but her mind stayed fixed on the words she had overheard. Board meeting. Sir, we have been looking everywhere for you. None of it matched the man in the old jacket sitting quietly alone at booth 7. She picked up the bills carefully. Crisp. Perfect. Fresh from a bank stack. Men struggling to survive did not leave $50,000 for diner coffee. Outside, Rain continued falling in silver waves beneath the streetlights while the city hummed softly in the distance. Claire slipped the money into the register under the diner policy for abandoned cash and tried convincing herself to stop thinking about Ethan Reed. But over the next few days, she caught herself glancing toward the diner door every time the bell chimed. Friday night passed. Then Saturday. No sign of him. By Sunday evening, Manhattan had traded rain for freezing wind. Christmas lights shimmered across storefront windows while couples hurried along sidewalks wrapped in scarves and expensive wool coats. Claire worked double shifts all weekend to cover her mother's pharmacy bill. Her feet ached constantly now. Even smiling at customers felt heavier these days. Around 11:30 p.m., she stepped outside the diner briefly for fresh air. Cold wind bit sharply against her cheeks as traffic lights reflected red and gold across wet pavement. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and closed her eyes for one exhausted second. "You look cold." Claire opened her eyes immediately. Ethan stood a few feet away holding 2 paper coffee cups. The same old jacket. The same calm expression. But tonight he looked more rested somehow. Less haunted. "You disappeared," she said before she could stop herself. One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "I did." He handed her one of the cups. "Hot chocolate. You do not seem like someone who actually enjoys coffee." Claire accepted it carefully, surprised by the warmth against her frozen hands. "How would you know that? You always smell the coffee before pouring it." His eyes stayed on hers. People who love coffee drink it immediately. People who only tolerate it hesitate first. Claire blinked once. Nobody had ever noticed something so small about her before. Wind swept down the block again, carrying distant taxi horns and the faint sound of Christmas music from a nearby bar. Ethan nodded toward the empty bench outside the diner. "Can I sit?" "You are the customer." "Tonight, I was hoping not to be." Something about the way he said it softened her immediately. They sat quietly for a moment beneath the flickering neon diner sign, while steam curled upward from their drinks. Ethan stared out at the street. "This city never sleeps," Claire said quietly. "No," he replied. "It just gets lonelier after midnight." She looked at him carefully now. Up close, his face carried exhaustion most people would miss. Tiny lines near his eyes. Tension hidden beneath composure. "What do you do?" she finally asked. Ethan smiled faintly into the steam rising from his cup. "Complicated question. Usually means finance." That earned a quiet laugh from him. Deep. Genuine. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who serves Wall Street men 6 nights a week." Claire tucked loose blonde hair behind her ear as cold wind brushed across the sidewalk again. "So what is it? Investments? Tech? Law?" Ethan leaned back slightly against the bench. "I build companies." "Sounds important." "Most things sound important when enough money is attached to them." The answer stayed with her for a second longer than expected. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance, just tired honesty. Across the street, a homeless man struggled, pushing a shopping cart through slushy snow near the corner crosswalk. Without hesitation, Ethan stood, reached into his pocket, and walked over. Claire watched quietly as he handed the man several folded bills and removed his own dark scarf, wrapping it gently around the stranger's shoulders before returning to the bench like nothing unusual had happened. "You did not have to do that," Claire said softly. Ethan stared out toward the traffic again. "Neither did you last week." "What?" "You gave free soup to the nurse who could not afford dinner." Claire frowned slightly. "You saw that." "I noticed things." Silence settled between them once more. Comfortable this time. Warm somehow despite the cold December air. Claire glanced sideways at him. "You know what is strange?" "What?" "You act like someone who has everything." Ethan looked down into the untouched hot chocolate cup in his hands, then slowly back at her. "Maybe that is because everyone thinks money fixes loneliness." His voice dropped softer now, almost fragile. "It does not." For a moment, neither of them moved. Neon lights reflected gently across the wet sidewalk while snow began falling lightly around them for the first time that winter. Small flakes landed against Ethan's dark hair and melted instantly. Claire suddenly realized she had stopped feeling cold. After that night, Ethan started appearing at the diner almost every evening just before closing. Never earlier. Never during the crowded dinner rush when businessmen filled booths with loud voices and expensive cologne. He always came when the city softened. When exhausted nurses dragged themselves home. When lonely cab drivers ordered pie at midnight. when Manhattan stopped pretending to be glamorous. And somehow, Booth 7 slowly became theirs without either of them saying it out loud. Claire noticed little things first. Ethan always stood when older customers approached the counter. He always thanked the cooks personally before leaving. And whenever he spoke to someone, he gave them his complete attention in a way that felt rare now. No phone in his hand, no wandering eyes, just quiet focus. One snowy Tuesday night, Claire arrived at work carrying grocery bags because her mother's car had broken down again. Before she could even reach the diner door, Ethan appeared beside her and lifted the heaviest bag effortlessly. "You keep appearing out of nowhere," she said softly as snowflakes drifted around them beneath the streetlights. "Occupational habit. That sounds suspiciously mysterious." A faint smile touched his face. "Maybe I enjoy keeping you curious." Inside the diner, warmth and the smell of cinnamon wrapped around them instantly. Claire laughed quietly as Ethan carried the groceries behind the counter like he had worked there for years. Martha nearly dropped a stack of plates watching him. "Sweetheart," the older woman whispered under her breath once Ethan stepped away. "That man is either secretly royalty or a serial killer." Claire nearly choked on her coffee laughing. "Martha, I am serious. Nobody looks that expensive while pretending not to." Claire tried ignoring the strange flutter in her chest at those words. Because Martha was right. Ethan did not belong in places like this. Every movement gave him away eventually. The way he folded his coat neatly over the booth seat. The way strangers instinctively moved aside when he walked through crowds. The way confidence followed him quietly without needing attention. But despite all of it, Ethan never treated Claire like someone beneath him. And after years of serving men who snapped fingers for refills without learning her name, that alone felt dangerous. One evening, Claire found him waiting outside the diner, holding a small paper bag from the bakery across the street. "What is this?" she asked. "Dinner." "That bag is way too small to be dinner." "Then dessert first." They ended up sitting on the hood of his old pickup truck overlooking the East River while cold wind curled around the city skyline. Inside the bag were 2 slices of apple pie, still warm from the oven. "You know," Claire said between bites, "most men try a lot harder to impress women." Ethan looked genuinely confused. "How so?" "Fancy restaurants. Flowers. Expensive dates." He stared out toward the glowing Manhattan towers across the water. "I spent years surrounded by expensive things." His voice turned quieter now. Most of them were empty. Claire studied him carefully beneath the soft glow of nearby streetlights. "Who hurt you?" Ethan smiled faintly without looking at her. "You ask very direct questions for someone so polite. And you avoid every personal question like a politician." That actually made him laugh. Warm. Real. The sound surprised both of them. Claire realized suddenly that she had never seen him fully relaxed before. "For what it is worth," she said softly, "I do not think you are a bad person." Ethan turned toward her slowly. Snow drifted lightly between them, while distant headlights shimmered across the river. "That sounds oddly specific." Claire shrugged. "Usually people carrying that much sadness are either very cruel or very kind." Silence settled for a moment. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket carefully and pulled out something small wrapped in tissue paper. "I saw this yesterday," he said quietly. "It reminded me of you." Claire unfolded the paper slowly. Inside rested a tiny silver snowflake charm attached to a delicate bracelet chain. Simple, elegant, beautiful without trying too hard. Her eyes widened immediately. "Ethan, it is not expensive," he said quickly. "I just thought." He stopped himself, suddenly looking unsure for the first time since she met him. Claire stared down at the bracelet glimmering softly beneath the city lights. Nobody had bought her something thoughtful in a very long time. Daniel used to buy gifts that looked expensive enough for photographs. But he never noticed what she actually liked. Ethan did. Somehow he always noticed. "Will you help me with something tomorrow?" he asked softly. Claire looked up. "Depends. Is it illegal?" "No," his smile returned slowly. "Just Christmas shopping." "You need help buying gifts?" "I have been told I am terrible at choosing presents." Claire laughed under her breath. "That is hard to believe from someone who notices everything." Ethan looked at her quietly then. Too quietly. "Not everything," he said. "Just the things that matter." And, for the first time in years, Claire felt her heart begin to trust someone before her mind could stop it. The next afternoon, Manhattan looked like a snow globe someone had shaken too hard. Snow drifted between skyscrapers while yellow taxis crawled slowly through slush-covered streets. Claire stood outside the diner adjusting her scarf when Ethan's old pickup truck pulled up beside the curb. The passenger window rolled down slowly. "You are late," she teased. Ethan glanced toward the dashboard clock with mock seriousness. 3 minutes. I was told New Yorkers forgive anything under 5. Claire smiled as she climbed inside. The truck smelled faintly like cedar and coffee. Warm air fogged the windows almost immediately while soft jazz played quietly through old speakers. "So," she asked, fastening her seatbelt, "where exactly are we shopping?" Ethan rested one hand loosely against the steering wheel. "Everywhere." That is not an answer. It is a very ambitious answer. For the next several hours, they wandered through crowded holiday markets, tiny bookstores, and decorated streets glowing beneath thousands of white Christmas lights. Claire noticed quickly that Ethan bought gifts differently than most people. He did not look at price tags first. He listened to stories. In a small antique shop downtown, he spent 20 minutes talking to an elderly owner about handmade music boxes before quietly purchasing 3 of them for children at a nearby hospital. At a bookstore near Bryant Park, he bought a leather-bound poetry collection because he remembered hearing Martha mention once that she missed reading after her eyesight worsened. "You remember everything," Claire said softly as they stepped back into the cold evening air carrying shopping bags. Ethan shrugged lightly. "People tell you who they are all the time." Snow crunched beneath their boots while couples passed wrapped arm in arm beneath glowing storefronts. "Most people just do not listen." Claire looked sideways at him. "You know what is strange?" "That question again?" "You keep acting like someone who grew up with very little." Ethan's expression shifted almost invisibly. "Maybe I did." Before she could ask more, his phone buzzed sharply inside his coat pocket. Ethan stopped walking immediately. The calm warmth around him vanished so quickly it startled her. He stared down at the screen without answering. Claire caught only a brief glimpse of several missed calls beneath a name labeled simply, Daniel Hart. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. Ethan locked the screen instantly. "Work. You say that like it is a disease." A tired smile touched his face. "Sometimes it feels like one." He slipped the phone away and motioned toward a nearby coffee cart glowing beneath white string lights. "Hot chocolate. You were trying to bribe me into not asking questions. Is it working?" Claire laughed quietly. "A little." They stood beside the cart sipping hot chocolate while snow continued falling softly around the city. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone player performed Christmas songs beneath the subway entrance stairs. Ethan watched people pass for a long moment before speaking again. "Can I ask you something?" Claire nodded. "Why are you still here?" "In Manhattan?" No, his eyes settled gently on her. "Why are you still willing to trust people after what happened to you?" The question caught her off guard. Claire stared down into the cup, warming her hands. Steam curled softly upward between them. "Because my mother used to say bitterness is expensive." "Expensive. It costs you good moments." She smiled faintly. "And I cannot really afford to lose any more of those." Ethan looked at her differently after that. Softer somehow, like something inside him had loosened slightly. They walked again after sunset, eventually stopping outside a tiny bridal shop in Queens glowing warmly against the snowy street. Claire froze immediately. Ethan noticed. "What?" She hesitated. "Nothing." But Ethan was already following her gaze toward the display window where a simple ivory wedding dress stood beneath golden lights. Elegant, quiet, beautiful without needing attention. Claire looked away quickly. "It is silly." "What is?" "I used to walk past this place after work." She shoved her hands into her coat pockets. "I saw that dress months ago." Ethan stayed silent beside her while snow drifted softly around them. "I almost bought it once," she admitted quietly. Before everything fell apart. Ethan glanced toward the dress, then back at her. "You would have looked beautiful in it." The words were simple, honest, and somehow that made them dangerous. Claire swallowed slowly. "You did not even see me wearing it." Ethan's gaze never left hers. "I do not think that part matters." For one suspended moment, the entire city seemed to disappear around them. No traffic, no cold wind, just soft snowfall and the quiet weight of something neither of them fully understood yet. Then suddenly a black sedan pulled hard against the curb across the street. 2 men in expensive dark coats stepped out immediately. One spotted Ethan and hurried forward looking visibly tense. "Sir," the older man said sharply under his breath, "we have been trying to reach you for hours." Claire looked at Ethan instantly. Sir again. Ethan's jaw tightened faintly. Not now. Tomorrow's merger announcement leaked online. The board is demanding a statement tonight. Claire's eyes shifted slowly toward Ethan. Merger announcement. Board. Sir. The pieces were beginning to fit together now, and somehow that frightened her more than it should have. Ethan looked back at her quietly. Claire. But she had already noticed the way the two suited men stood around him. Not like co-workers. Like people protecting someone important. Claire barely slept that night. Snow tapped softly against her apartment window while Manhattan glowed pale blue beneath the winter sky, but her mind stayed trapped on the same image over and over again. The suited men. The black sedan. The way they called Ethan Sir, without hesitation. None of it matched the quiet man drinking coffee in booth 7. None of it matched the old pickup truck or worn brown jacket or evenings spent eating pie beside the East River. By morning, curiosity had turned into something sharper. Fear. Not fear of Ethan himself. Fear that she had once again failed to see someone clearly. Claire stood inside the diner tying her apron when Martha slid a newspaper across the counter without warning. You look pale, the older woman muttered. Read page 3. Claire frowned slightly and unfolded the paper. Then her entire body went still. Across the business section was a full-page photograph of Ethan standing beside several politicians and executives outside a Manhattan skyscraper. Same eyes, same posture, same calm expression she knew by heart now, but dressed in a charcoal suit worth more than her yearly rent. The headline beneath the picture read, Ethan Cole announces record-breaking merger deal worth $8.4 billion. Claire stared at the paper as heat drained slowly from her face. $1 billion. Ethan Cole. Cole International Holdings. Suddenly, every strange detail over the past month rearranged itself perfectly inside her mind. The watch. The black card. The SUV. The board meetings. The security around him. You know him? Martha whispered carefully. Claire folded the paper too quickly. No, but the lies sounded weak even to herself. Her chest felt strangely tight all afternoon. Customers spoke around her in blurred voices while dishes clinked somewhere far away. Ethan had lied to her. Not directly perhaps, but enough. He let her believe he was struggling. Ordinary. Safe. And somehow that hurt more than she expected. Around 10:30 p.m., the diner bell chimed softly. Claire did not need to look up to know it was him. Ethan crossed the diner slowly, snow melting against the shoulders of his dark coat. Tonight, he looked less hidden somehow. More like the man from the newspaper. Powerful. Controlled. Dangerous in the quietest possible way. He stopped beside booth 7. Claire. She kept wiping the counter without looking at him. Coffee. Silence. Then softly, please. Claire poured it mechanically and carried the cup over without meeting his eyes. Ethan watched her carefully. You saw the article. Not a question. She gave a short laugh under her breath. You think. He looked down briefly. I wanted to explain. Which part? She asked quietly. The billionaire part or the fake name part? Pain flickered across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. Ethan is my real first name. That is your defense. Nearby customers continued eating unaware while snow drifted softly. Outside the diner windows. But inside booth 7, the air felt painfully still. Ethan folded his hands slowly together. I did not lie because I wanted to manipulate you. Claire finally looked at him then. Really? Because pretending to be a regular guy while secretly owning half of Manhattan feels pretty manipulative. I never pretended to be poor. You let me believe it. Ethan went silent. And that silence hurt because she realized he knew she was right. Claire crossed her arms lightly. Do you know how humiliating this feels? Claire, no. Seriously. Was this entertaining for you? Her voice stayed soft, but her eyes burned now. Some billionaire social experiment? Ethan looked at her like the words physically landed somewhere deep. You think I would do that to you? I do not know what to think anymore. The diner suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. Claire stepped away from the booth before her emotions reached her face completely. Ethan stood immediately. Please let me explain. She shook her head once. You had weeks to explain. And I was terrified to. That stopped her. Claire turned slowly. Ethan rarely looked uncertain. But right now uncertainty sat plainly across his face like exhaustion finally winning. People treat me differently the moment they know who I am, he said quietly. They stop speaking honestly. They stop relaxing. They stop seeing me. Claire's voice softened despite herself. So you hid. At first, yes. Ethan glanced down toward the untouched coffee between them. Then I met you. Silence. Heavy and trembling. Ethan exhaled slowly. You spoke to me like I was normal. His eyes lifted back to hers now. Honest. Tired. I forgot how much I needed that. Claire felt her anger crack slightly around the edges, which only made everything worse. Because part of her still believed the man sitting in front of her was real. You should have trusted me with the truth, she whispered. Ethan nodded once. I know. Snow continued falling softly outside while the city lights blurred against the windows like fading stars. Finally, Claire untied her apron slowly and placed it on the counter. I need some air. Ethan stepped forward. Instinctively. Claire, please do not walk away angry. She looked at him for a long moment, then quietly said the one thing he clearly feared most. I do not know who I fell in love with anymore. Claire stopped answering Ethan's calls after that night. At first she told herself it was anger, then embarrassment. But deep down, it was something harder to admit. She missed him too much to think clearly. Manhattan moved toward Christmas faster every day. Storefront windows glowed gold and silver while tourists crowded sidewalks wrapped in scarves and laughter. But Claire felt strangely disconnected from all of it now. Booth 7 stayed empty every night. And somehow that empty booth became louder than the diner itself. Martha noticed immediately. You two break up before actually dating? She asked one evening while refilling sugar containers. Claire forced a small smile. Something like that. Martha studied her carefully over the rim of her glasses. You know, rich people lie about money all the time. That is supposed to help? No, the older woman shrugged. But lonely people lie about loneliness even more. Those words followed Claire home that night. She stood in her tiny apartment kitchen reheating canned soup while snow drifted softly outside the fire escape. Her mother sat nearby wrapped in a blanket watching old black and white Christmas movies. You have that face again, her mother said gently without looking away from the television. Claire frowned. What face? The one where you pretend not to care about someone. Claire stirred the soup slowly. He lied to me. Did he lie about who he was? Her mother asked softly. Or did he lie about how much money he had? Claire opened her mouth immediately, then stopped. Because the truth felt uncomfortable now. Ethan had still been kind, still listened, still remembered small things nobody else noticed. The man beside the East River had been real. So had the quiet nights in Booth 7. So had the way he looked at her like she mattered more than the room around him. I just do not understand why someone like him would want a life this simple, Claire whispered. Her mother smiled faintly. Maybe because simple things are the hardest to buy. 3 days later, Claire finally saw Ethan again. Not at the diner, not beside Booth 7, but on television. The diner customers were watching a business news segment while eating breakfast when Ethan appeared across every screen in the room, standing in front of cameras outside a skyscraper downtown. Ethan Cole announced this morning that Cole International will donate over $200 million toward hospital expansion projects across New York State. The reporter said, while flashes from photographers exploded around him. Ethan looked composed as always in a dark tailored coat, but Claire noticed something nobody else would have. He looked exhausted. Billionaires always do charity after scandals, one customer muttered nearby. Claire almost defended him automatically before stopping herself. The report continued. Sources close to Cole International say Ethan Cole has remained personally involved in nearly every charitable division connected to the company since inheriting the business at age 24 after his mother's death. Claire's attention sharpened instantly. His mother. The screen shifted briefly to an older photograph of a younger Ethan standing beside a smiling woman wearing a diner uniform and paper waitress hat from decades earlier. Claire froze completely. Waitress. His mother had been a waitress. Suddenly memories rearranged themselves differently now. The way Ethan treated restaurant staff with quiet respect. The way he noticed exhausted workers. The way loneliness settled into him whenever conversations turned personal. That night after closing, Claire found herself walking without thinking. Snow crunched softly beneath her boots while cold wind drifted between glowing Christmas lights overhead. Before she realized it, she was standing outside the diner looking at Booth 7 through the window. Empty again. Then she noticed something folded carefully beneath the sugar dispenser inside the booth. Her heartbeat quickened immediately. Claire stepped inside quietly and lifted the note with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably Ethan's. Clean. Precise. Understated. I never wanted you to fall in love with my money. I just hoped maybe someday you would trust the man drinking coffee with you after midnight. Claire swallowed hard. Below the message rested the tiny silver snowflake bracelet she had forgotten to wear lately. Her chest tightened painfully. He came by earlier, Martha said softly behind her. Claire turned quickly. When? About an hour ago. Martha leaned gently against the counter. Sat there for almost 40 minutes staring out the window like some sad movie character. Despite herself, Claire laughed weakly through sudden tears. Martha's expression softened. Sweetheart, I have worked in diners for 36 years. She nodded toward the bracelet in Claire's hand. Men pretending to have money are common. Then quietly she added, men pretending they do not have money? That usually means they are terrified of losing something real. Claire looked down at Ethan's note again while snow continued falling softly outside the diner windows. For the first time since learning the truth, her anger no longer felt solid. Only sad. Because beneath all the lies and hidden names and billion-dollar headlines, she still missed the man who brought her hot chocolate when she looked cold. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in soft snowfall and silver skies over Manhattan. The city glowed with the kind of beauty that only lasted a few weeks each year. Department store windows shimmered. Church bells echoed faintly through crowded streets. Somewhere downtown, children laughed while ice skates carved delicate lines across Rockefeller Plaza. But inside the diner, the world still felt small and warm and familiar. Claire stood behind the counter refilling coffee cups while holiday music played softly through old speakers overhead. She wore the silver snowflake bracelet again. Martha noticed immediately, but wisely said nothing. Around noon, Claire's phone buzzed quietly inside her apron pocket. She almost ignored it until she saw the sender. Ethan. Her heartbeat stumbled instantly. The message was short. Please meet me tonight. 1 hour. That is all I ask. Beneath the text was an address in Brooklyn she did not recognize. Claire stared at the message for several long seconds. Go, Martha said without looking up from the pie she was slicing. Claire blinked. What? You have been staring at your phone like a woman in a romantic movie for 30 seconds. The older woman smirked faintly. Either answer him or stop looking heartbroken every time the door opens. Claire exhaled softly. What if this is a mistake? Martha finally looked up then. Sweetheart, love is always a mistake at first. The good ones just become worth it later. Snow fell heavier by evening. Claire stepped carefully through Brooklyn streets wrapped in her long wool coat, while cold wind carried the smell of roasted chestnuts and distant fireplaces through the air. The address led her to a quiet neighborhood near the water far away from Manhattan penthouses and glass towers. Finally, she stopped in front of a small brick building glowing warmly beneath white Christmas lights. A cafe. Simple. Cozy. Almost hidden. Claire frowned slightly before pushing open the door. Soft jazz floated through the room immediately. The cafe was empty except for Ethan standing near the window beside a decorated Christmas tree. He wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater instead of a suit. No security. No assistants. Just him. Ethan looked nervous when he saw her. Truly nervous. It made him seem younger somehow. More human. You came, he said quietly. Claire slipped snow from her coat, sleeves slowly. You said 1 hour. Ethan nodded gently. Thank you. For a moment neither moved. Then Ethan motioned around the cafe. This place belonged to my mother. Claire looked around carefully now. The space felt loved. Old photographs lined the walls beside handwritten recipes framed beneath warm lights. Small wooden tables. Worn floors. Quiet dignity in every corner. She opened it when I was 10, Ethan said softly. We lived upstairs. Claire turned toward him slowly. Ethan walked toward one of the framed photographs and touched it lightly. My father left when I was little. My mother worked 18-hour days most of my childhood. A faint smile crossed his face. I used to sleep in booth 3 after school while she served coffee. Claire felt something tighten, gently inside her chest. Ethan looked around the cafe like someone revisiting an old memory he never truly left behind. When the company became successful, everyone told me to sell this place. His eyes met hers again. I never could. Silence settled softly between them while snow drifted outside the windows. Why did you really hide from me? Claire asked quietly. Ethan took a long breath before answering. Because every woman I dated before you loved Ethan Cole. His voice lowered. Not Ethan. Claire said nothing. Ethan stepped closer slowly. Do you know what it feels like when people study your watch before your eyes? His smile carried no bitterness now, only exhaustion. Or when every conversation becomes a negotiation? Claire looked down briefly. Ethan's voice softened further. Then I met you. He laughed quietly under his breath. You cared more about whether I was eating enough than what I owned. Claire felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly and pulled out something small. A ring box. But unlike the giant diamond advertisements covering Manhattan during the holidays, this box looked simple, worn almost. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside rested a delicate vintage ring with a small oval diamond surrounded by tiny silver details. Elegant, quiet, beautiful without needing attention. It was my mother's, he said softly. Claire looked up immediately. Ethan's eyes never left hers now. I was going to wait longer. He smiled weakly. Probably much longer. Then quietly he added, but I spent 2 weeks realizing I would rather lose every dollar I own than lose the woman who made me feel normal again. Claire's breath caught painfully in her chest. Ethan stepped closer until only soft silence remained between them. I cannot promise you a perfect life, he whispered, but I swear the man drinking coffee with you after midnight was real. Snow tapped gently against the cafe windows while Christmas lights glowed softly around them. Claire looked at the ring. Then at Ethan. Then finally she whispered the truth she had been afraid to admit, even to herself. I never stopped loving that man. 6 months later. Spring sunlight poured softly across the Manhattan skyline, while reporters crowded outside St. Andrew's Church on the Upper East Side. Black luxury cars lined the street bumper to bumper. Cameramen adjusted equipment beside marble steps, while women in designer coats whispered excitedly beneath blooming white roses. I heard half of Wall Street is inside. Someone murmured near the entrance. Of course they are, another replied. It is Ethan Cole. But inside the church, none of that seemed to matter. Claire stood quietly in a small dressing room near the chapel wearing the ivory wedding dress she once believed she would never own. The fabric shimmered softly beneath warm light, while delicate lace rested gently against her shoulders. Simple, elegant, exactly the way she always imagined. Martha dabbed tears dramatically beside her while pretending not to cry. You know, the older woman muttered, adjusting Claire's veil. I still cannot believe the man from Booth 7 turned out to own private jets. Claire laughed softly. Honestly, neither can I. But the truth was stranger than that. Because even now, after months together, Ethan still felt most real to her sitting across from a coffee cup at midnight with snow melting against his coat sleeves. Not on magazine covers. Not at charity galas. Not standing beside politicians and billion-dollar buildings. Just Ethan. A quiet knock sounded against the dressing room door. 5 minutes, someone whispered gently outside. Claire's heart began beating faster immediately. Not from fear exactly. From disbelief. Her mother squeezed her hand softly. You look happy, she whispered. Claire glanced toward the mirror again, then smiled faintly. I am. Outside. Church bells echoed softly across the city as guests slowly rose from polished wooden pews. Ethan stood near the altar in a perfectly tailored black suit, while sunlight filtered through stained glass above him in shades of gold and blue. But despite the cameras outside and the powerful people filling the church, he looked strangely calm. Peaceful almost. His closest advisor Daniel leaned toward him quietly. The press is calling this the wedding of the decade. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed toward the chapel entrance. They are attending the wrong wedding then. Daniel smiled faintly. Still nervous? Ethan exhaled slowly. Terrified. You negotiated a $12 billion merger without blinking. Ethan's expression softened slightly. This matters more. Then the music began. Soft piano drifted through the church, while every guest slowly turned toward the entrance. Claire appeared beside her mother beneath warm spring sunlight spilling through the open doors. And for one suspended moment, the entire room seemed to fall completely silent. Ethan stared at her like he had forgotten how breathing worked. Claire saw it instantly. Not the billionaire. Not the businessman. Just the same quiet man who once brought her hot chocolate because she looked cold outside a diner. Tears filled Ethan's eyes before she even reached the altar. He laughed softly under his breath at himself, while wiping one away quickly. You are crying already? Claire whispered once she reached him. Ethan smiled weakly. I had a feeling this would happen. Soft laughter rippled gently through the church. But then Ethan took her hands in his, and suddenly everything else disappeared around them. Cameras, wealth, headlines. None of it remained. I spent most of my life believing success meant building something bigger than myself. Ethan said quietly during his vows. More companies, more buildings, more money. His voice trembled slightly now. Then one exhausted waitress handed me coffee at midnight and reminded me what peace feels like. Claire's eyes filled instantly. Ethan smiled softly through his emotion. You loved me before the headlines, before the truth, before the world stepped in. He squeezed her hands carefully. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that. Claire took a shaky breath before speaking. I thought love had become transactional, she whispered. Something people traded instead of protected. Her eyes stayed locked on his. Then you walked into a diner pretending to be ordinary. Soft laughter drifted through the room again. Claire smiled through tears. But the truth is, she glanced down briefly at the wedding ring resting between them. The kindest thing about you was never your money. Ethan's eyes closed for one emotional second. It was the way you made people feel seen. Silence settled gently through the church after that. The kind of silence filled with meaning instead of emptiness. Hours later, after photographs and speeches and endless congratulations, Ethan slipped quietly away from the reception, with Claire still wearing her wedding dress beneath his coat. Where are we going? She laughed as he guided her toward a waiting car. Somewhere important. 20 minutes later, the car stopped outside a familiar glowing neon sign. The diner. Claire blinked in surprise. Inside, the night cook nearly dropped a spatula seeing them walk through the door dressed like that. Ethan slid into booth 7 while Claire laughed helplessly beside him. You brought me here on our wedding night. Ethan looked around the diner softly. This is where my life changed. Martha emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 slices of apple pie, already smiling through tears. I knew you two would end up back here, she said proudly. Outside, Manhattan continued glittering beneath the spring night sky, while expensive cars waited somewhere far beyond the diner windows. But inside booth 7, none of that mattered anymore. Ethan rested one hand gently over Claire's while steam curled upward from fresh coffee between them. Quiet, warm, real. And for the first time in a very long time, the billionaire finally looked rich in all the ways money could never buy.